Yeah. Mm. Okay, so we're on page 8 in the booklet. And on top of the page it says, Don lekavschus, to judge favorably. So again, these are the words of the Mishnah, where it says you should always judge the other person favorably. So let's explain a little bit what that means practically, to judge other people favorably. So there's actually a few ways to explain this, a few different ways to approach this. So let me start from the beginning. The beginning is like this. When you hear something about another person, they did this or they said this, human nature is to react, wow, I can't believe they did such a thing. Get all worked up. Are you sure that they did it? Is this a fact or you just, in other words, human nature is when you hear something that someone did something wrong, you just naturally accept it. And there's something in us that is willing to accept it. If someone else starts raising doubts, says, no, I know this person, I could see them doing this. What is it in our nature? What is it in our nature that that is something inside me that I'd like to hear faults of other people? The answer is probably that when I hear other people have certain faults, it makes me feel better about myself. So I guess I'm not so bad. It makes me feel superior to that person. So there's something in me which makes me actually feel better when I hear that another person did something wrong. But the Torah tells us that that's not the way we're supposed to approach things. On the contrary, when you hear that someone did something wrong, you shouldn't be ready to accept it and to believe it. So the first thing is that it's very possible that it just never happened. I don't know if you remember, we spoke about this somewhere in the beginning of the year. There's an expression in Yiddish that the story grew a beard. And it means that every person who repeats the story adds one hair. And by the time the story reaches you, there's a full-grown beard, and the story is way unrecognizable, almost has nothing to do with what happened in the beginning. I told you it was 9/11. I was telling you about my son-in-law, my daughter who teaches next door. Her husband worked in the World Trade Center, and he came a few minutes late. A few minutes means when he walked out of the train, he saw the plane crashing in the second building. And he works on top he worked in the 70th floor. So it was a miracle that he came late that day. Why did he come late? Everyone knew the reason why he came late, because he spilled coffee on his shirt and he had to go home to change his shirt. So those few minutes, he ended up coming later, and that saved his life. When he was asked about it, he had no clue where that came from. Yeah, he came late for a reason, because one of his nephews was coming from out of town. He went to the airport to pick him up. How that turned into coffee on your shirt, I have no idea. But obviously somebody said something that sounded like something, which ended up being something. It's called broken telephone, and it's already a fact. Everybody knows that this and this happened. So unfortunately, very often when you hear stories about someone did something, who says that it's true in the first place? To speak Lashon Hara, and they're eager to say something negative about another person, They'll say it, they'll maybe be so enthusiastic, they'll even add a little spice here and there. And the next person adds another spice and another here. And when you hear the story, it's totally, in other words, Dana Kapschus judging favorably could sometimes mean it actually never happened. The story is a fabricated story.
Too many chefs spoil the broth.
That's one way of looking at it, yep. So that's one possibility, yes.
You should only believe a story when you've heard it from someone directly involved. Or
If you want to judge someone based on the story, if you hear a story about something good, you don't have to do super investigation. Why not? I'll accept that they're a nice person. But if you hear that someone did something negative, and that's the reason why I sort of look down at the person, or I don't feel comfortable with them, or I'm judging them, don't do that, because maybe it never even happened. Or something happened which is exaggerated 100 times. You know, someone said, I heard that your first cousin won a $5 million lottery. But first of all, it wasn't my cousin, it was my next door neighbor. And second of all, it wasn't a lottery for $5 million, it was for a free subscription to the Time magazine. Whoops. So, you know, there was something there, and that something grew a beard, you know. Yes.
What is also the Torah vision of if someone does judge you unfavorably, you know, directly? How are you supposed to then?
Because being judged.
Judge them favorably that they're
And they're judging you
that
unfavorably.
they're really, you know, unsure, you know, they don't know really what's happening and they've made a judgment or.
Again, it's a general statement, but you're asking an interesting question. How should I judge favorably someone who's judging me unfavorably?
Right.
So, in a sense, it's similar to the idea if someone hurts me, it doesn't give me the right to punch him back in the face. If I'm doing something to defend myself, you have 100% right, and not only right, an obligation. But if it's just to get back at them, that's called revenge, and revenge is also a negative character trait. So imagine if someone's judging me unfavorably, I could say it's not really their fault, somebody misled them, you know, and somebody was very like, maybe someone said that they actually saw it happen and they believe them, they trust them, and that person was lying. There is a way sometimes to judge people favorably when they're judging me unfavorably. It doesn't mean that they did the right thing, but there's a way of sort of softening the feeling towards the other person. I want to go a step further. Sometimes it's actually true, 100%. I find out that what you told me this person said is true, what the person said is true, but very often if you don't know in what context this happened, then it can have a totally different meaning. I'm sure there are hundreds of stories like that. In fact, there's a book that was printed. It's called The Other Side of the Story, which means when you hear something from one person and you form a certain opinion, then the other person comes and says, let me tell you the other side of the story, and suddenly you feel foolish even thinking of what you were thinking. So there's a story that happened here, which I like to tell. The story happened a very long time ago. It was either my second or my third year that I came here, in the early 80s. And there was a student that came to the dorm, but she came at the end of the summer. The dorm wasn't open yet. Mrs. Gansberg, who was the dorm mother, arranged a family where she can stay by them for an entire week before the dorm opens. Everything was a very nice family. Everything was fine. After she joined the dorm, and then came Shabbos, and Mrs. Gansberg said, okay, I'll set her up in that family because she knows them already. Because no, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there, ever. Oops, something must have happened. And she was really surprised because they're very nice people, and she always dealt with them. The girl didn't want to talk, and finally, after a lot of, gently pushing and prodding, she finally told her. I was sitting in my room, and I heard her husband on the phone telling somebody, I also have unwanted guests. I'll help you get rid of them. I said, you know what I feel like? I don't ever want to go there again. And then one day, not long after that, she met the woman who was the hostess. And she was saying that I met this girl that stayed by us. I don't know, she's so cold, and she's like, as if she doesn't even know me. I don't understand. Like, I think I was so nice to her. So now that she knew the story, she said, I'll tell you the truth. I'll tell you what happened. Anyway, she goes back to her husband, And he starts laughing. Why is he laughing? Because his work, he was an exterminator. He was talking to one of his customers about mice, which are called, at least in America, we call them unwanted guests. Mice, rats, roaches. So he told her, I'll help you get rid of the unwanted guests. I also have unwanted guests. What he was talking about was the mice and the roaches. What she heard was, wow, he's calling me an unwanted guest. Forget it, I never want to be here again. So the truth is like this, if she would be upset at this person, she'd have the right to call her an unwanted guest. If the hostess would be upset at the girl that I was so nice to her and she's so cold to me, so ungrateful, I think she'd also have the right. But it's because there's not, they're miscommunicating. There's a misunderstanding. So it means there are certain times where it could be true. You saw someone do something, you heard somebody say something, but it's still a misunderstanding and it's not, you're misinterpreting what really happened. They meant something completely different. So again, if I'm just going to follow my nature, I won't bend myself, I won't bend out of shape to go find some sort of a justification. I'll say probably that's what they meant, and that's the way I feel. But the Torah tells us no, go out of your way, make an effort, and stop and think. There might be a possibility that you're misinterpreting what happened. And if you stop and think, you'll probably be able to get it. And I can go a step further. What if there's no misinterpretation? The person meant what they said, or the person did what they did without a question. So again, sometimes when something is done in one context, it's a positive thing. In a different context, it's a negative thing. So one of the examples you can give for that is, you all know, probably, that in the early stages when Hasidus became a movement, it was something new. There was a lot of fear that this is a new movement that's perhaps going against Torah, because a lot of things that Hasidim did were very different. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in the year when the time comes, about why they were so worried and why they were so suspicious, because there was a movement before Hasidus called Shabtai Tzvi, which actually misled Jews away from Judaism, and it was Kabbalah-based, but a distorted Kabbalah. And therefore, they were afraid that this is the same thing. And there were people that came out very strongly against the Hasidim and so on. There was a certain rabbi who was probably the biggest Torah scholar in that generation. He was vehemently against Hasidim because people were coming to him and testifying that they saw Hasidim do this and Hasidim do that. And later it turned out that these people had their own agenda and they were not being honest. But this is one of the stories which is an established fact, that he came out with a very strong letter against the Hasidim, and it was after an incident that he was told that by people who testified and said, I saw this with my own eyes, the Hasidim were eating and drinking on Tisha B'Av. Eating and drinking on Tisha B'Av is one of the things that this person, Shabtai Tzvi, did. He violated Tisha B'Av. He said that he's Mashiach and the redemption's here already, and we don't have to, even though there's no temple, we don't have to mourn the temple anymore. We can eat and drink on Tisha B'Av, which is prohibited. But when they came and they said they saw Hasidim eating and drinking on Tisha B'Av, that was the clincher. So clearly they're followers of that movement. Later, it was discovered what they said was actually true. They just they intentionally left out one detail. And that is when they saw them eating and drinking on Tisha B'Av, it was when Tisha B'Av came out on Shabbos. When Tisha B'Av comes out on Shabbos, not only you're allowed to eat and drink, you're not allowed to fast. You're not allowed to mourn on a day like Shabbos. So that means they told the truth, but a detail was left out. But that detail that was left out makes the whole difference whether this was good or evil. And the same is here. Sometimes what you heard is true. Every detail is true. We're not saying that it didn't happen. We can't say that it was misunderstood, but it could be that you're missing a detail to the story. And once you know that detail, all this is suddenly seen from a different perspective. And it's not even a negative thing. It's actually a very positive thing. That's the book that I mentioned. It's called The Other Side of the Story, I think. And it's all sort of little episodes, they're very cute episodes where, somebody was very angry at another person, and then they realized that they themselves were actually the reason why it happened. It wasn't even their fault, it was my own fault. And that means if you leave out a certain detail, you're not aware of a certain detail, you can see things in another way. So we're supposed to be making that effort to try to look and say, is it possible that to look at what happened in a positive way and not in a negative way, not to judge the person in a negative way? So far, so good? Okay, now what happens if I know the details, nothing was left out, everything is true? Can I judge them? Do I have the right to judge them? And then, so there's another quote which goes along with this quote, and that's number 2. Don't judge another person until you reach his place or their place. What does that mean? You're judging that person because they did something which you consider was inappropriate. You don't know the circumstances of what happened, what led them to do what they did. And perhaps if you would have been under those, in that situation, with that kind of pressure, and that kind of stress, and whatever it is that was going on, perhaps you would have done exactly the same thing. It was a very, very testing situation. So therefore, you can't judge the person because you don't know what was going on behind the scenes, or like what led this person to do what they did. And one would think, let's say that day they hadn't eaten for many days. Let's say that day they were evicted from their apartment and they're out on the street, so they were very stressed, and therefore they screamed at somebody. They were angry, whatever it is. But it wasn't just the way you think it was. It was connected to a lot of other things that happened that caused them to act this way. Okay, that I can understand. But then the person says, I was in the exact same situation. I also had a situation where I was evicted, or yes, it was extremely hot. I also was extremely hot. And it was also extremely cold. And I also had no money to put food on my table. And nevertheless, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. Does that give me the right to judge the other person? Why not? If I can say, don't judge them unless you were in their shoes, I was in that same situation. What's the answer?
But you're not that person. You haven't had all the previous things happen to you to get to that place.
There's actually a Pirkei in Tanya, a chapter in Tanya that you probably never get to because it's chapter 30. We only get to chapter 20 the most. But there's a whole entire chapter of Tanya where the author talks about this and pretty much says you could never be in the same situation as the other person because we're all different. We have different chemistry in the physical body, as far as our physical body is concerned, chemistry, even the spiritual chemistry. We know from Tanya that some people have more fire energy, water energy, earth energy, air energy, and that has a big effect on our personality, what makes us tick. So therefore, one person could react to stress in one way, person could react to the same stressful situation in an entirely different way. And that has to do with the fact that I have 90% of me is fire and the other person, 90% of them is water. So they're calmer and I'm more fiery. We see out in the world, not people who study Pirkei Avos, ordinary people, even people who don't study Torah, not even Jewish, just nature. You see certain people are naturally calm and certain people naturally blow up at every little thing that doesn't go their way. There's something in their makeup. Someone just sent me a WhatsApp today that they discovered, this is all with the new discoveries that they can work with the genes, they discovered with mice, that they found what they could change. If this gene is there, then the mice is more selfish. And if not, then the mouse is more giving, which hopefully they're planning to do with people. So imagine you come to a doctor, I have a temper, what do? No, we'll just change around the genes here, you'll be a calmer person. But it is true, the genes have an effect. And according to Tanya, it's surely true that there's a spiritual chemistry of the soul. So therefore I can't say I haven't eaten for 3 days, just like that person, and I didn't react in a negative way. So don't give me an excuse, he hasn't eaten for 3 days. No, it's not true. You didn't eat for 3 days and he didn't eat for 3 days. You're two different people and you have a different makeup and you perhaps react to the same thing differently than him. Not because you're a better person, just because you are a different kind of person. And this can go across the board with any kind of situation. So in a certain sense, and also like Cheshvan says, wait a second, every human being has more than just what happened today. What happened when I was a child, certain trauma a person went through, what happened in school, everything in my life experience has an impact on me and the way I react. I'm not saying it's an excuse that I can do whatever I want, but I'm saying it can explain that one person's test is much more severe than another person, even though it's the exact same circumstances. In fact, the Rambam, Maimonides, when he talks about the laws of tshuva and the laws of sin, the Rambam writes that there's nobody that can really judge a person, because we always imagine there's a scale. Hashem puts the positive things on the right side, the negative things on the left side, and sees if the scale weighs down to this side or the other side. The Rambam says no human being, and not even angels, can really judge. Why? Because Hashem doesn't judge by numbers, 10 good things versus one bad thing, or 10 bad things versus one good thing. He says there could be one good thing that for this person, under these circumstances, is worth like 1,000,000 good deeds. And there could be another situation, one bad deed could be worse than 100,000 bad deeds. It all depends on the circumstances, the person, where they're coming from, what kind of life they had, and everything together. Who can make that judgment? There's only one that can make that judgment. That's Hashem. Nobody else has that information, has that knowledge, all encompassing to be able to judge. So in reality, I could never really be in another person's situation. And therefore, a person should say, who knows, if I would have been in their situation, with their weaknesses, with their experiences in life, could be I would have reacted even worse than they did. So I have no right to judge them. So these two things go together. First of all, judge every person favorably. And the other part is that, which means even if I discover that the fact is true, and even if I discover there's no misunderstanding, and even if I discover that I got all the details, there's nothing missing to the story, I still can't and have no right to judge another person. And the reason is because I could never be in their place. And why does Hashem create people so differently? Because we all have different shlichus, we all have a different mission. Each one of us has a unique purpose in this world. And Hashem gives us the tools that we need for our mission. So therefore, some people are stronger in one area, weaker in a different area. And some people are the opposite, because I get what I need to do. Crew. One of them is wearing a mask. Nobody else is wearing a mask. One of them has boots. Nobody else is wearing boots. One long tool. Nobody else has that same tool. Because they're all doing different things. The guy who's working with the fireworks needs a mask. Anybody else would put on a mask, it would be a hindrance. The one who's working with the plumbing and there's a lot of water all over the place needs boots. Anybody else, if he put on boots, it would just get in his way. Somebody's working on one area, he needs a big, long tool to get there. And the other person's working on something else and needs something very small. So if you'd ask a question, which tool is better, the longer one or the smaller one? Is it better to have boots or not to have boots? Is it better to have a mask or not to have a mask? So it depends on who you are and what you're doing. So Hashem gives each and every one of us what we need. And he gives us the strength that we need. And the areas that we don't need that, we don't have that strength. And therefore, everybody is different, and there's no way that one could say, I was exactly in the same place as the other person. Yeah.
They all need helmets though, so what's the helmet?
The helmet?
Yeah.
When you wear a hard hat when you're afraid something will fall down and hit you on the head. Why do people wear helmets in construction? Because you're building things and things fall. But if you're not working in the building, let's say you're the architect and you're in your office and you put on a helmet, they'll look at you like it's Purim or something. Why are you putting on a helmet? So everything has its time and place. Yeah.
Isn't also judging someone unfavorably like a form of Lashon Hara in a way? Could we say that it is?
It is.
You're perceiving something, or you're listening to something that you don't know exactly what happened.
It is, but there are two parts to it. One is I shouldn't be listening to Lashon Hara.
Right.
What if someone tells me something, but before I had a chance
Right.
to even say anything or move away. I heard the information.
Right.
The second thing is not about speaking Lashon Hara or listening to Lashon Hara. It's about what's being formed in my head in terms of an opinion of that person, my own personal
Right.
in my head. And that's not Lashon Hara.
Okay.
It's not a good thing, but that's why it says do not judge
Mental
people.
Lashon Hara.
Right, it's mental Lashon Hara, yeah. Internal Lashon Hara. Now, we constantly, before I go to number 4, let me do number 3. In fact, there's an interesting statement in Gemara where it says, Kol ha-posel, umumei posel. Which means if a person sees fault in other people, I think it's referring to a specific fault. There's someone that's always finding fault. Every time they tell them about somebody's doing something, say, and they're not honest, they have an agenda, they're not doing it for the right reasons. They're always accusing people of something, especially if it's a similar thing. Usually, they're projecting their own faults onto the other person. That's what it is. And it's almost like by me speaking about other people's faults, I'm actually revealing to everybody else what my faults are. They tell the story that this man had a problem because his wife wasn't hearing well and she wouldn't go to a doctor. So he decided he's going to go to the doctor. And he says to the doctor, my wife is having a problem with, she doesn't hear well. And she doesn't want to go to a doctor. So maybe you can give me advice, what I can do, what I can tell her to do. He says, I can't really advise you unless I know how severe the hearing loss is. So how can I tell you? I'll tell you what to do. You'll do a little test and you come back and give me feedback. When you come home, when you stand by the first door, as you walk in, say something. She doesn't hear you, walk in a little bit closer, say something, keep moving that until you figure out at which point she could finally hear you. So I have an idea how bad the hearing loss is. In other words, are you standing 10 yards away, 5 yards away, 3 yards away, 2 yards away? So he comes home, opens the door, and his wife is in the kitchen. He says, hi, I'm home. What's for supper tonight? No response. So he walks a bit closer. Hi, I'm home. What's for supper tonight? Still no response. Keeps walking closer and closer. Finally gets to the doorway of the kitchen. Says, hi, I'm home. What's for supper tonight? And she says, for the 5th time, spaghetti and meatballs. So yeah, he's the one who had the problem with the hearing. Basically, it's a joke which reflects how many people they see fault in another person, but they're the one that needs the doctor, and they're the one that has the fault. The Gemara actually brings examples from stories in Chumash that in one of the examples would be the story with Korach and Moshe. There's a pasuk in the Torah that says Moshe was the most humble person that ever lived. When Korach made a revolution, what did he accuse Moshe of being? Arrogant. That you want leadership for yourself, you're an arrogant person. Imagine how far off he was. Hashem put into the Torah, something which is written for all of eternity, that Moshe is the most humble person. Ish Moshe Anav Mikol Adam Pnei Adama, and he was accusing him of arrogance. Why? Because that was his fault. He was arrogant, and he wanted leadership for himself. And therefore, he was blinded by that desire, and he was blinded to see that whatever Moshe is saying comes from Hashem. And unfortunately, he lost his life. So when a person has a certain fault, they'll see that fault in others. I guess this goes together with what we said before. When you judge other people not favorably, it could be that because I have this weakness, that's why I think either consciously or subconsciously that the other person has the same thing. But there's another question here, which we have to explain. Very often when we do Pirkei Avos, it's always necessary to emphasize that we don't take things to an extreme. You have to find the right balance. So when you learn this, you say, okay, you have to always judge a person favorably. So someone knocks on your door. You never saw this person before. I'll get to you in a second. Hello, can I stay in your place? Who are you? Where you're from? What's the difference? And you think to yourself, well, he's supposed to judge everyone favorably, so probably he's a nice person. He's probably an honest person, and probably I should let him into my house. It's dangerous to do that. So therefore, we have to use our common sense. I've probably heard about something called common sense, that even though the Torah tells us, generally speaking, judge people favorably, but it doesn't mean that every single person in the world is a perfect person. So therefore, if I'm allowing someone in my house or someone's asking me for a loan and I have no basis even to think that I can trust this person, of course you don't have to do that and you're not supposed to do that. So there's an expression found in Gemara, number 4, kabdeyu v'chashdeyu. It's an interesting expression. You should honor him, but be cautious. In other words, when you're being cautious because you don't know who the person is, it doesn't mean that you're judging him not fairly. Just that means that you don't know who he is. You know nothing about him. So, and in fact, when someone is innocent and you accuse them of something, especially if you say it to them, that's called cheshvan b'ksher, and that's number 5. Suspecting and accusing an honest person of something which he's not really guilty of. I mean, there's a story, this is actually a true story, that happened with one of the wealthiest Jews that lived was someone by the name of, he was a big banker in Germany, and his name was Rothschild. I think there's still families with that kind of, with the wealth, but there's a story that's told about how it came about. To make a long story short, because not too much time, was that the father of the Rothschild families who lived about 200 years ago or more, maybe 250 years ago, he worked as a helper in a certain rabbi's house. He helped around the house with technical things. And it was before Pesach, and the rabbi searching the house for chametz. And when he searched the house for chametz, he opened up every single drawer just to make sure there's no crumbs there. And he also had a drawer that's where he kept his money. He locked up his money in the drawer. It was under key and lock. And he opens the drawer just because he wanted to make sure every place is being checked. And he opens the drawer and he's in shock. It's empty. This is where he kept this was his bank. That's where he kept his money. And he asked his wife, did she maybe use something? And she was shocked. They didn't know what to do. And they figured out that it couldn't have been the cleaning lady. She wasn't there this time, there that time. Who is it? It has to be somebody who knows where the key is. And they tried to figure it out. At the end, she was convinced that it's this boy that worked for them. He's the only one that could probably have seen that he opens the drawer and puts away the key, and he would know where the key is, and he probably took the money. And he said he doesn't believe it. He's an honest boy. He would never do such a thing. But she nudged him to just confront him. Finally, after a lot of harassment, she confronted him. He confronted the boy. When he confronted him, he broke down crying. Because he was saying, this is all my life savings. I saved this up for my child's wedding, and now I'm like devastated. So he began to cry, and he said, I don't have any money to pay you, but if you allow me, give me time, I'll send you money every month. And he was so embarrassed that he left. He didn't work there anymore. He went to another city, but every month he would send him money. This went on for a while. And then one day, maybe a year later, they were visited by the chief of police, and they came to tell him that there was a woman that her husband has a lot of money, and everybody was wondering, his friends, where'd you get the money from? He was drunk. So he told them that his wife stole it from the rabbi's house, and told them exactly how it happened. And he told the police where the money was buried. They found all the money and they brought it back to him. But now he realized that he actually accused him for no reason. He was very broken. He was beside himself. Not only that, he was sending him money every month, which means he didn't have to send him anything because he never took the money. But he felt bad for the rabbi, and he pretended that he was really guilty, and he sent him the money. So he traveled to that city. He asked him for forgiveness, and he's the one who gave him a bracha that because of this, he and all the generations to follow should be blessed with tremendous wealth. And that's how he became Rothschild. That's the story that they tell. So we learn a lot of things from the story. Of course, you learn from the story that you have to be careful not to accuse somebody when they're not really guilty. But you also learn from the story that that you have to ask for forgiveness when you do something like that. And of course, an amazing thing that a person did, when he wasn't obligated to do that, to take on the fault on himself and actually sort of try to find a way to, like, it's an example what you just asked me, actually. Here the rabbi is judging him not favorably, and he's helping the rabbi financially. Okay, to be continued. Good Shabbos, and enjoy your trip. Have a great time, everybody. Yeah.
Maybe that was his way of judging him favorably by
What?
by judging him favorably that he got accused by sending him the money. I don't know.
Right, that he judged in favor, that he was probably under such tremendous pressure.
Right.
And he didn't know, he couldn't think of any other alternative. Obviously, he was able to see it the right way.
Right.
So I hold more the car somewhere, near the door. But I don't know if like the roots are
Multiple,
different. I don't know
but
if part of the
there's
fire hydrant.
There's signs that say like Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday,
But you don't have
Thursday, only do tomorrow morning, so you don't have to worry about those signs.
just the fire hydrant, that's all.
Parkland, fire hydrant, don't,
That's all.
park like a metered park, like
Okay.
where you have to pay the car.
Uh-huh.
It's like on the for example, there's like some metered parking, but it'll say it, or like don't park like where bus lanes, bus stops, but that's all, yeah. Yeah, thank you, that's welcome. Thank you.
Where are you going?
Pick up the car for tomorrow.
Are you guys see all later?
Bye.
Yes.
Take care. Be well.
You too.